Should the LA Kings make a head coaching change? That and more on this edition of Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. I'm Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked On LA Kings. I've worked in sports media for the past 30 years, also one of the co-hosts of Locked On NHL Game Night, a nightly podcast and YouTube show that recaps the night in the NHL, and a passionate LA Kings fan for over 30 years. The LA Kings have some big decisions to make in the coming weeks. A new GM needs to be hired, and based on comments from team president Luc Robitaille on Tuesday, that GM will have a say in who the Kings head coach is next season. Of course, that man right now is Jim Hiller, took over as Kings interim head coach during the 2023-24 season, replacing Todd McClellan. Under Hiller, the Kings finished the 2023-24 season with a 21-12-1 record, finished third in the Pacific Division, made the playoffs, and were eliminated by the Oilers in the first round in 5 games. Hiller then became the full-time head coach the following season, his first full-time head coaching job in the NHL after many years as an assistant. He was given a 3-year contract with an option for a 4th year. This season, he guided the Kings to a 48-25-9 record for 105 points, tying the franchise record for most wins and points in a single season. However, the Kings, for a 4th straight season, were eliminated in the first round of the playoffs, once again by the Edmonton Oilers, this time in 6 games. The postseason saw Jim Hiller be heavily criticized for 3 major issues during the playoffs. One of them was a failed coaching challenge in Game 3, resulted in the Oilers scoring the go-ahead power play goal. The late-game tactics in Games 3 and 4 that saw the Kings go into a defensive shell, stop playing aggressively or offensively at all, and resulted in LA failing to hold third-period leads and eventually losing both games, one in regulation, one in overtime. And his use of the Kings bench, where for the most of the series, he failed to use his 4th line and his 3rd defensive pairings, resulting in an overuse of his top 3 lines and his top 2 defensive pairings. So let's take a deeper dive into those criticisms. We'll start with the coach's challenge in game number 3. While I strongly disagreed with it at the time, and I haven't changed my mind that it was a bad decision, of the 3 criticisms we're going to talk about, this one might be the most defensible for Jim Hiller. Maybe. So let's go back to game 3 in Edmonton. Kings are leading 4-3, 6:40 to go, and the Oilers of Evander Kane scores what many believe was a controversial goal. The goal call on the ice was a kick into the net and no goal. But upon video review, they changed the call and the game was tied at 4-4. On the same play, Jim Miller decides to challenge for goalie interference, which seems like, for most, a pretty awful decision. Now, to be fair to Jim Hiller, 2 things. One, goalie interference is a very subjective call. I have seen things this season called goalie interference. I thought that there was no way that was goalie interference. And I've seen things that I thought there was no way that's goalie interference called goalie interference. That said, looking at that play, I saw no contact with Kings goalie Darcy Kemper that would have allowed him to not play his position or hinder his ability to make a save on that particular play. I thought it was a horrible challenge, and especially at the time, not worth the risk. Now, yes, had the call gone the Kings' way, the Kings would have remained in the lead with 6:40 to go. But the failed challenge resulted in a power play for the Oilers. They scored immediately, and now your team is behind 5-4 with 6.5 minutes to go. The building's going insane. You have to ask your team now that have been playing on their heels the entire period to suddenly turn that around and try and get a game-tying goal. So the challenge really did blow up in Jim Hiller's face. Now, you can say that the Kings still had a chance to kill off the penalty, but Hiller should never put his team in that position to begin with. Now, the Kings, had they not challenged, they still could have lost the game. It would have been tied 4-4 with under 7 minutes to play. Who knows what happens? But in my opinion, Jim Miller should have given his team a chance to try and get a game-winning goal rather than have them to push to get a game-tying goal down 5-4. I thought that was a more reasonable expectation. And maybe the game goes overtime and then it's one shot goes in and that's the game. And again, this is not second guessing on my part. I was live tweeting during the game and I said immediately I thought that this was a bad decision to challenge for goal interference. Now, I said of the three criticisms, this one might be the most defensible. I think it's safe to say that in the end, it is still Jim Hiller's call, but he may have also gotten some bad advice on this one. You've got an assistant coach in Derek Johnson on the bench. He's a former video coach who I'm sure has input in this. Samson Lee is a name that you might have heard of. He's the Kings' current video coach. He's advising Jim Hiller on these types of things as well. And that's their job. That's a huge part of their job. It's all they do. And you have to, at some point, have a certain level of trust in your staff. And look, there have been times this season where I think they've told Jim Hiller to challenge plays that maybe I didn't necessarily agree with. And I couldn't give you a number as far as their success rate this year when challenging calls, but I watched every game this season, and the Kings were more successful than not when they did decide to challenge calls. The only time I can remember the Kings challenging a play where I was like, "Oh, that's a bad decision," was against the New York Islanders. Now, in that game, you might remember the Kings challenged not once but twice for goal interference, and both times the Kings won the challenges, and it was a big reason why they won that game. And the first one I remember being okay with them, but the second one, I remember it clearly. It was Brock Nelson who scored a goal as he kind of backed into Darcy Kemper, and I did not think it was goal interference, and the Kings challenged it, and they won the challenge. So again, I have no doubt that the people that are making these decisions, the guys like Samson Lee that are studying video, it's all they do. They're sitting somewhere in the arena watching the game on video, and they've got the ability to rewind and all that kind of stuff. I have no doubt he knows these rules better than I do, that this is his job. He's studied this extensively because it is his job. And frankly, his job's on the line if he doesn't get these calls right, or at least give the right advice. And afterwards, he's going to have to be able to explain himself as to, why did you tell me to challenge that? And he says X, Y, and Z. And then in the end, you either say, I agree with your decision to tell me to challenge, or you don't. But again, it still does fall on the head coach to ultimately decide we are going to do it or we are not going to do it. And maybe Jim Hiller got some bad intel on this, but and maybe he was trusted a little bit too much. But again, in the end, it's on him. And it's also not like he just takes their word for it. There are video tablets on the bench. There are screens on the bench that the coaching staff can look at to also help them make the decision on whether to challenge or not. But it's also not just black and white. You have to take into account what's going on in the game. How much time is left? What's the score? How is the other team playing? How is your team playing? Where is the game being played? To me, all of that added up to not worth the risk of challenging this call. And ultimately, he did, and obviously it didn't work out. Jim Hiller said in his exit interview about the challenge on Monday, quote, "In hindsight, it's an easy call, but in the moment, it was difficult. We were disappointed with the way it went. We would have liked the outcome to be different and killed the penalty after, I think. That compounds the call. It's a big moment. There's no question," end quote. It was a big moment, and in the end, the right decision was not made, and in the end, that does go against Jim Hiller as far as part of the criticism he takes on in the Kings not being successful in their first-round playoff series. Up next, we'll talk about the Kings and them not holding leads in games 3 and 4 and how that happened and Jim Hiller's role in that. That's next on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Looking for a snack that is both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats that help you keep feeling fuller longer. It's the perfect grab and go snack for busy days, whether you're snacking at your desk or on a road trip or just need a quick protein boost. If you love cracking open every shell for that satisfying crunch, then the in-shell options are a classic favorite. Wonderful Pistachios is a complete protein providing all 9 essential amino acids. Whether you're running between meetings or dropping off the kids, Wonderful Pistachios is the snack that works as hard as you do. Get snackin' and get crackin' with a snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. As we have mentioned, the LA Kings had a 2-0 series lead in their playoff series against the Edmonton Oilers, going to Edmonton for games 3 and 4. And the Kings held leads going into the third periods of both of those games, and they ended up losing both of those games. Another big criticism of Hiller and his staff is the perception that they instructed the team to play more defensive in the third period of those games and got away from what they were doing well, and it ended up costing them. The Kings led in game 3, 4-3 going into the third. They lost 7-4. The Kings led game 4, 3-1 going into the third, and they lost 4-3 in overtime. Hiller was asked in his exit interview if the team changed their approach with the lead in games 3 and 4 with the lead late, and he said, quote, no. He also added that sometimes we don't give credit to the other team. Well, pretty much everyone has come to Jim Hiller's defense on this one. Kings GM Luke Robitaille said, quote, no coach has ever said, let's sit back and we're going to win this one, end quote. Drew Doughty said in the player exit interviews, quote, the coaches were not telling us to back off and sit back. There was no talk about doing that. It's just human nature to sit back. Me and Cope are telling the group, don't sit back. Let's be on our toes. Let's keep working for offense. I don't know why it doesn't happen. It just doesn't sometimes. So that wasn't something that was talked about just sitting back. It's just kind of naturally happened. Even though we did sit back, we still should have gotten the job done. 6-on-5's got to be better. We had to get the job done, and that's on the players. I wouldn't blame the coaches for that, end quote. His defensive partner, Mikey Anderson, said on sitting back and whether they were instructed to do so or not by the coaches, quote, no matter who you're playing, when you're up, you're going to push a little bit harder. Instinctively, you maybe then pull back a little bit. Sometimes that just happens. You maybe try to play a little bit safer, but it's not like we were getting told or trying as a group to want and sit back. Sometimes it just goes that way, end quote. Kings forward Kevin Fiala said, quote, it's not easy. Everyone is sitting back because we're leading. You don't need to chase. You don't need another goal. The bottom line is we needed to get the job done, and we didn't. We were leading. We were playing way better than them. We just have key moments where we didn't close it out, where we should have closed it out, but we didn't, end quote. And Kings goalie Darcy Kemper said, quote, obviously it sucks looking back at the leads that we had in the series that disappeared. I'm sure there are a lot of things we did through the regular season. We did well. For whatever reason, we got away from it a little bit. And some of it is you don't get a break here or there, and things change quickly in the playoffs, end quote. So maybe if you're taking the Kings players at their word, maybe this is more on the players than the coaches. And look, I played sports growing up, a lot of different sports, and I understand that sometimes the other team gets on a roll and you just can't, it seems like you can't do anything to stop it. I could accept that if it was one game, but 2 games in a row, it happening, that's where I kind of have a big issue with this. So game 3, I mean, there was a lot going on, the controversial goal, the controversial challenge, and things were snowballing, going downhill, and you can't stop it. Okay, I can understand that. But then it happens again in game 4. Like, doesn't the coaching staff say after game 3, okay, guys, we need to continue to play the way we've played the first 2 periods. We can't sit back on the lead. We got to stay proactive, not reactive. You know, we've got to keep going. Let's learn our lesson from game 3 going into game 4. And that didn't happen. Now, was it because the Kings coaching staff didn't emphasize that? I don't know. I'm not in the locker room. It's just hard to imagine a repeat of that in game 4. And yeah, okay, sure, we should give some credit to the Oilers. I get that. And as Mikey Anderson, I think, said, the other team gets it going. And, you know, but again, the hard part for me to swallow when it comes to this is that it happened 2 games in a row. I can understand it maybe 1 game, but the exact same situation, even a better situation, because the Kings didn't have a 1-goal lead, they had a 2-goal lead in the third period of game 4. And it happens again. It just happens to happen again. The players didn't learn from game 3. The coaches didn't emphasize, we can't do this in game 3. You don't learn your lesson. That's hard to swallow. Now, how much of the decision on how to play the players and use your players and the workload on the players, how much of that factored into maybe what happened late in game 4 and then carried over into game 5? That is definitely something to talk about, and we'll hear what Jim Heller had to say about that and the players themselves. We'll do that next here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day.
An award-winning mattress can change your life. I speak from experience. It happened to me. After years of uncomfortable sleeps, I recently switched to Bear Mattress, and the results were instant. Bear Mattress is designed with a focus on recovery, cooling, and pressure relief to upgrade your sleep and improve your overall quality of life. I used to deal with night sweats, but Bear's best-in-class cooling ensures optimal temperature regulation, which prevents overheating and helps me stay comfortable all night long. Bear offers a wide variety of mattresses, but to get the right one for you, take their sleep quiz that matches you to your perfect mattress based on body type and sleep preferences. Go to bearmattress.com and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL at checkout to get 40% off site-wide. This offer is not available anywhere else. You have to use my promo code on the very last page of checkout to get this discount. That's bearmattress.com. Use my promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get 40% off site-wide. Bearmattress.com, promo code LOCKEDONNHL.
All right, we continue to look at Jim Heller and some of the coaching decisions that were made in the playoffs this year and how that contributed to the Kings not being able to advance out of the first round once again. The third thing we're looking at is Hiller and the coaching staff's use of the players during the series, specifically, for the most part, using only the 3 forward lines and the 2 defensive pairs, and how that may have affected the team and the result of the series. Now, Jim Hiller said in his exit interview about his use of players, quote, "Every opponent has different strengths and weaknesses. This particular team has certain strengths that we were wary of, so we had played a different opponent. It might have been different. Had we beaten Edmonton and gone on to somebody else, things would have been different again. You have to evaluate the team you're playing and make your choices," end quote, talking about who he sends out to play, especially late in games. Now, I appreciate what he's saying here, but in the end, you have to trust your players to get the job done. You can't kind of protect your roster. I think in a way, he's almost saying like the roster is not good enough or he doesn't trust his players. But the Oilers seem to trust their guys, and it helped them, I think, without question, in this series. And the Kings coaching staff, I mean, judging by what was said to me, I interpret that as the Kings coaching staff not trusting their bottom end type players. And you could certainly make the argument that in key moments of the series, not having more of a rested team, or the Oilers having more of a rested team, having used more players, was part of the factor in the Kings not being able to get the job done, particularly in the overtime of game 4 and then game 5 in LA, where the team looked like they had no gas. Adrian Kempe, in his exit interview, was asked about the minutes played by the top forwards. He said that he didn't feel like he was playing too much or that it kept him from playing at a high level, but he added, quote, "Playing 3 lines through almost a series could be tough. Tough if you go further in the playoffs, maybe you need to play some more lines and more guys. It's tough to say, but personally, I wasn't getting tired in games 5 or 6. Philip Deneau had a bit of a different take. He said he thought fatigue was a factor in the Kings' big game 5 home loss, where they came out after losing the 2 disappointing games at Edmonton and just didn't seem to have any energy or life for a crucial game 5 on home ice. He said he thought fatigue was a factor. He didn't say it was because they were only playing a certain number of players, but he said fatigue was a factor. Mikey Anderson was asked about the use of the Kings' young defensemen in the series. He said, quote, Spenny and Clark sucks sometimes for them, especially the way it went where they didn't get as many opportunities maybe as they probably deserved, but that's the way it goes. But they're great players, end quote. Brent Clark said about his ice time being reduced in the playoffs, quote, in the playoffs, I was not as big of a role as maybe I had earlier in the year, but I just want to win. In the coming years, I do want to have a bigger responsibility, end quote. Jordan Spence, who had his ice time drastically reduced in the series, probably was the most outspoken player about all this. In game 2, he played 8 minutes and 50 seconds. In game 3, he played 2 minutes and 55 seconds. And then in game 4, he was a healthy scratch. He said on his usage in the postseason, quote, it was tough. We know our job and what we have to do. And for me to not get to contribute as much in the playoffs is unfortunate. Whatever the coaches give me, I try to do the best at, and whatever the team needs. But I think maybe I had more to give during the playoffs, but that's how it goes sometimes. It's hard. I thought I did pretty well in the regular season to be able to have trust with the coaches, but I've been here for 2.5 seasons. I think I've given them what I can bring to the table, and the trust they should give me, I want a bigger role. It was unfortunate for me to kind of just sit there and not be on the ice. I can become more of a complete player, for them to trust me more in certain situations. I'm ready for the challenge, for them giving me more of an opportunity, end quote. I don't think there's any question that the use of the lines and the distribution of the minutes did play a factor in how the Kings performed. I think specifically in game number 5. And again, I think that is a legitimate criticism of Jim Hiller and his coaching staff. So Jim Hiller was asked in his exit interview about things he could have done differently now looking back at the series. And he said this, quote, you can always look back and say we could have done this and we could have done that. I think every time you lose, no matter who you're playing or if you don't win or achieve your goal, you can always think maybe we could have done this better or different. But in the end, you make the decisions in the moment with the information you have, and it didn't turn out for us, end quote. There was a moment during the player exit interviews that I'm reading too much into, maybe not, but all the players were paired together. Like there was, Andrei Kopitar with Drew Doughty, and every group, there was 2 Kings players. One of them was Adrian Kempe and Trevor Moore. And they were asked what Jim Hiller could improve upon next year. And Kempe looked at Moore, and Moore looked at Kempe, and Kempe kind of smiled and looked at Moore as if to say, you answer that one. And Trevor Moore said one word, experience. And if the Kings decide to bring back Jim Hiller, I think that's what they're banking on. The fact that Jim Hiller will learn from his mistakes and be better the next time. Luc Robitaille talked about that as an organization, as a team, that's what they need to do. They have to learn and they have to get better. And look, I like Jim Hiller personally. Seems like a good guy. And he did an excellent job in the regular season. I mean, the results, the record, the numbers speak for themselves. In 116 games as Kings head coach, he has a record of 69, 37, and 10. That's great. But as Luc Robitaille himself said, it's not about winning a first-round series. It's about winning the Stanley Cup. And when you look at the Kings and what they can do next season to be closer to winning a Stanley Cup, I think you have to look at the coaching staff. Is this a coaching staff that is good enough right now to win a Stanley Cup? And I think the answer has to be no. And there are options out there for the LA Kings. Peter Laviolette is an example. He has won a Stanley Cup. He's top 10 all time in coaching wins. He just took the New York Rangers 2 seasons ago. They won the President's Trophy, and then they went to the Eastern Conference Finals. Now, he got fired this year because things went really bad really quick. But it's hard to imagine a coach that has accomplished as much as he has. If his hand's on the rudder of the Kings ship, it certainly seems to me it's pretty logical that increases your chances of accomplishing your goal. Now, a guy like him, is going to be in high demand with the number of coaching vacancies that are out there because of those reasons that I mentioned. Maybe he doesn't want to come to LA. But if I'm the Kings next general manager, that's who I'm targeting. Somebody like him. And there are a couple other guys out there that are available. Joel Quenneville won 3 Stanley Cups in Chicago. He interviewed for the Ducks vacancy. Dan Bilesman is a former Kings player. He won a cup in Pittsburgh. He just got let go by the Seattle Kraken. So if I'm the Kings and I'm looking to improve next year, and there are certain things you can do and you can't do when it comes to the roster, it's pretty much set. But a coaching change is something you can do to make the team better. And what I don't want to see is the Kings make a coaching change just to make a coaching change. That you have to bring in someone that is clearly better, has the experience. It doesn't make any sense to me to bring in another coach who hasn't had playoff success. That doesn't make any sense. I would rather they just keep Jim Hiller. I think that would be a better option than to just bring in some other guy who has to learn the team and then the team has to learn a new system and all that kind of stuff. So if that's an option, that's something I think the Kings should absolutely explore. Now, if those guys don't want to come here, then I would stick with Jim Hiller. And ultimately, I do think that Jim Miller is probably going to be back for at least one more season. And while I said I think the Kings need new ideas, a new vision when it comes to constructing a team or the vision of the team going forward with a new general manager, I don't know that that's necessarily the case when it comes to head coach. If you can get a head coach that has been there and done that can give the Kings that experience on the bench in playoff games, I think you do it. But again, I don't think making change for the sake of making change is necessarily the right idea. I think the Kings should pursue a more experienced head coach, a coach that has won a cup, because those guys are available. But ultimately, in the end, if they don't want to come here for whatever reason, then I think you keep Jim Hiller on the bench. But I would keep my options open if I was the LA Kings about a coaching change. All right, for you everydayers, those of you that listen and watch Locked On LA Kings every day, coming up on tomorrow's show, we are going to look more at the roster of the LA Kings and what can be done moving forward with the roster, who we know is definitely coming back, who we aren't sure about, and how that can all go down, and what the road looks for the LA Kings like in the near future. We'll do that on our next show. If you want to contact the show for our fan feedback show on Friday, I'm sure lots of things to discuss, including, do you think that we need a coaching change? The email address is lockedoneddie@gmail.com, EDDIE. You can always post your comments if you're watching on YouTube in the comments section. We'd love you to stay interactive with the show on social media, X, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. We are at Locked On LA Kings. I'm Eddie Garcia. Thank you, as always, for listening and watching this episode of Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Have a great rest of your day. We'll talk to you next time. And as always, go Kings, go.